Is Miller Moss still the right QB1?
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this Thursday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my 6th year covering U of L, 4th year hosting this show, and I want to take the time to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville, free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Be sure to leave a comment in the YouTube section below, because as you all know, it is a great way to help the show continue to grow. It is very much appreciated. But another weekly mailbag today. We have 3 questions, only 3 to answer. We will answer 1 per segment, sort of big picture questions that I wanted to give my opinion on. But very painfully blunt, direct, and to the point. Some questions about Miller Moss and the waning confidence from part of the fan base for the QB1. Is it time to temper expectations after a lackluster performance against James Madison? And what needs to happen for the Cardinals to make sure that they are successful for the rest of the season? We'll answer the questions. But first, today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is here. Visit the FanDuel app today. Start planning your futures bets now. As I mentioned, 3 questions. Usually we have upwards of 8, 9, even 10 sometimes just to get as many questions in to answer. But it's the bye week, and there were some pretty painfully direct questions that I'm like, okay, I've got to answer these because I'm seeing the noise grow on social media. I'm seeing the discussion happen more and more. It's becoming more frequent. So for the record, I think 2 of these 3 questions are based on overreactions. The first one is this. Miller Moss hasn't lived up to my personal expectations through the first 2 games of the season. Number 1, do you think that he is still the right guy for the QB1 spot, and what is your confidence level in him? And number 2, do you think that there is a reality where Jeff Brom makes a switch at QB1 in the near future? Let's answer number 2 first. Unless he completely disappoints and the offense can't move the football, they don't score points, he can't find his receivers, unless he just completely disappoints, I don't see Louisville making a QB change. Like, you brought in Miller Moss to be the guy. And if you wonder about Jeff Brom's confidence in Miller Moss, I direct you to the game last Friday where in the 4th quarter, Jeff Brom trusted Miller Moss and the Cardinals' passing attack to be able to move the ball down the field. They threw the ball 3 straight times. They ended up punting, so it didn't work, but it just highlighted the confidence that Brom has in Miller Moss. And it hasn't waned through 2 weeks. So the answer to the second question is no, I don't think that a QB change is coming soon unless he just completely disappoints and can't move the football whatsoever. Don't forget, there were times in the 2023 season where Jack Plummer struggled early on. And Brom stuck with him. He brought in his guy for a reason. So number 2, I don't think that a change is coming in the near future. But what is my confidence level? Do I still think he's the right guy for QB1? Well, go back to what I've said this offseason. All offseason, I have been a huge advocate for Miller Moss. I have believed since Louisville started recruiting him that he was the right guy for year 3 under Jeff Brom. And I still believe that through 2 games. So the answer to the question is yes, I still have confidence. Yes, I still think he is the right guy for QB1. And let's take a look at this. Eastern Kentucky. And look, I think a lot of it is based upon box score chasing, right? It's not, when you look at the stats, it's not going to pop off the page. First game, 17-25, 223 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Last week, 13-23, 151, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions, also had a fumble. Now, he did have a rushing touchdown in that first game, but I feel like a lot of concern is based upon the fact that he's not putting up the counting stats. Now, the other part of this. I mean, there is some truth to the fact that maybe he's not playing as good as we would have thought early on. But I think that there's pretty clear reason or reasons, plural, as to why this is. And we start with EKU. He had one of the highest transfer portal quarterback PFF grades in the entire country in week 1. He looked really sharp. He made some good throws. He had one mistake, and it was the pass at the end of the first half where he threw the ball to Trayshawn Hurry. It was overthrown too high. Hurry ended up tipping the ball up, and it got picked off by Vito Tisdale and ran back for like a 20-yard-ish pick six. Kind of one of those, I won't say full fluke plays, but I think blame is on both guys, but probably mostly Miller for the bad throw. The second one, the throw down the sideline to Antonio Meeks, was a fantastic placed football. It was a great throw. It was a fluke interception where Meeks had it going to the ground, and then it popped up out of his grasp, and then he kicked the ball up, and then there was an interception that happened. So if you are going to blame Miller Moss for Antonio Meeks kicking the football up, hey, it's petty as can be, but I guess I respect it for how petty it is. But that's what I'm saying. 2 interceptions doesn't really tell the tale. He was pretty efficient. He only played the first half. He did what he needed to do, and he made some really good throws. In the James Madison game, this is where things get a little bit challenging because I think that the whole offense was out of sync. Jeff Braun mentioned it in the post-game press conference that they weren't prepared for the defense that the Dukes ran. The Dukes ran an uncharacteristic cover zero blitz where you're all or nothing, feast or famine, rushing the passer, clogging the interior of that offensive line, and forcing Louisville to make big plays throwing the football. Now, there were also times where some of those guys acting like they were going to rush the passer served as a decoy. Some of them dropped back in coverage, and the Cardinals' offensive line had a really challenging time identifying who the actual pass rusher was. So what ended up happening was that every time Miller Moss dropped back, or a good amount, how many times did you watch a free blitzer just run through the line of scrimmage? Miller Moss takes the snap, boom, he's got to scramble because somebody's on him. And that happened a good portion of the game to where he doesn't have much time to throw the football. I will tell you this now, there are not many quarterbacks in college football in 2025 that could have played in that game with the lackluster offensive line play and have succeeded. I feel pretty confident in saying that. Not to mention, the Cardinals' offense was extremely one-dimensional. They couldn't run the football. Outside of Isaac Brown's 78-yard touchdown run, James Madison sold out to stop the Cardinals' run. Louisville got no push up front. There weren't any lanes for Brown and Duke Watson to run through. And thus, what happened was that the Cardinals were consistently playing behind the sticks. 2nd and long, 3rd and long. Play calling at times was predictable. So you had that going against you. It was just sort of a perfect storm of things that didn't go well. And you're going to blame the quarterback because the quarterback gets all the praise when things go right. The quarterback gets all the blame when things go wrong. Fair or not, that's just kind of how reality works. So the unpreparedness of the offensive game plan and learning to deal with that, zero blitz, the poor offensive line play, being one-dimensional to where James Madison was just kind of selling out to make you to where you had to throw on 3rd and long. And when you have to convert on multiple 3rd and longs, it's not going to be a recipe for success. There were some drops. Chris Bell had a couple drops, a touchdown drop in the end zone. There was another drop over the middle of the field. So 13-23, Miller had some really good throws, and some of them were just flat out dropped. I don't like to be this guy, but I felt like James Madison also got away with being a little physical on the outside. A lot of holds that weren't called, but I'm not going to sit here and use that as an excuse, but I think it's worth mentioning. So a lot of things kind of coming together, and it resulted in Miller Moss not looking great. Now, here's the thing. Miller is not without blame. I thought that on that 4th and 2 when they went for it, from what it looked like is that it should have been an RPO. And instead of throwing the ball out wide, which probably would have gotten a first down, Miller kept the ball, I think it was to Kewan Brown, and didn't get the first down. So, I mean, Miller held onto the ball too long at times, Maybe he didn't make the right read at other times. It happens. He wasn't perfect. I'm not sitting here suggesting that he's been great because he hasn't been great. I just don't think he's been bad enough to the point to where we have to question if he's the right QB1. I don't, because I think that this is more of an offensive issue more than it is just a Miller Moss issue. And I think that you get the offensive line cleaned up and things are going to look much better. So I think that he's going to bounce back. I think as Louisville improves as a unit, especially up front, you give Miller Moss time to throw, better preparation for the game or the opponent that they're playing against. And I think that you're going to see Miller Moss look more like he did against EKU in week 1, even though you're going to be playing better competition. So yes, I do think that Miller Moss is still the right guy at QB1 for the Cardinals. But there's also, I feel like, this growing discussion about whether or not it's time to temper expectations for the rest of the season. I have a pretty firm stance on this question, and I'll answer when we come back on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Card Nation, it's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this past week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered the most. Let's break it down. For the Cardinals against James Madison, Cleve Lubin delivered in a huge way. Had the monumental forced fumble in the end zone that ultimately led to Louisville claiming their first lead of the night. He had 10 total tackles, was living in the James Madison backfield. When the pressure was on, he came through. No hesitation, no delay. And if you've been watching the first couple of weeks, the performance wasn't a fluke. Cleve has been on a streak. And just like Cleve delivered for the Cardinals, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash Streaks. You save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Promo period through November 18th. Thank you all so much for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked on Louisville is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Also, don't forget to leave a comment in the YouTube section below. Your answers to any of these questions, thoughts on the Cardinals during the bye week, and much more. It's a great way to help the show grow, and I appreciate the interaction. So, moving on to the sort of second question that's based on an overreaction. Me describing that should tell you what my stance is for the question. Second question. With how Louisville played against James Madison, do you believe that it is time to temper the expectations for the remainder of the 2025 season? I think it first depends on what your personal expectations were, right? Everyone has different expectations. I see some people that had 7 to 8 wins. Some people had 10 to 11. I was right there in the middle. I thought that the expectation was to win 9 games. The over-under win total set by FanDuel was 8.5. I thought the expectation is to win 9 games, possibility to win double-digit regular season games. My official season prediction before the year was 10-2. Am I ready to change that after the second game of the season? I'm not. I think it's way too early. Now, has it been extremely encouraging through the first 2 weeks? I mean, EKU, it's hard to really get a grasp on. But the James Madison game was hard to watch at times. It was embarrassing at times. I thought that Louisville's offense was completely perplexed. I really liked what I saw from the Cardinals' defense, but even then, if James Madison could throw the football, then might have been a different game. But they really couldn't throw the football. Anyway, so I think it's too early. I go back to 2023, where Louisville trailed by double digits against Georgia Tech in that first game, ended up coming back and winning that game. And then the third game, they had to really hang on to a victory against Indiana. And after that game, I sort of pondered the same question. But even maybe then the expectations were a little different because it was year 1 versus year 3. the more things change, the more situations change. I feel like the more they do stay the same, there is some continuity and some comparable factors with these two situations. And I don't think it was pretty, but there is, a comfort in being able to win games where you don't play really well. So for the James Madison game, for example, that's the game that has everyone worrying. I understand, and we have broken down what went wrong, what Louisville needs to fix. We've been pretty honest about it. I feel like I can say that with full confidence that we've been pretty honest about it. We haven't, we haven't not talked about anything. Like, we haven't sugarcoated anything. We hadn't been a sunshine pumper. Like, we've been pretty honest. That's how I like to be on the show. I like to look at things from as an unbiased point of view as I can. Not always able to do that because of how much I care about U of L, but we try to, at least when it comes to results in games. So with that being said, from a bird's eye view, looking at the game last week, the Cardinals played pretty poorly on offense. They couldn't really get much going. Defense played good. A top 40 team in the AP rankings came to your stadium on a primetime game with nothing to lose. This was their Super Bowl. Bob Chesney, the head coach of James Madison, does a great job of getting his guys ready for the top game on their schedule. Louisville is the best game on James Madison's schedule. And what you saw on Friday night confirmed that. How many trick plays did you see? James Madison went with a defense that they don't really use just to try to stop Louisville's offense. And albeit it worked for the most part. The Cardinals had 2 big plays, and that was really enough, combined with the fumble recovery in the end zone. That was enough to win the game. But not only that, with how bad Louisville played, with how, all out James Madison went to win this game. You could say, well, James Madison beat themselves. And by the way, all the victory laps that I'm seeing from a team that lost by 14 points is wild. Absolutely wild. I'm not sure that I've ever seen it. And I've given a ton of credit to James Madison. They looked really solid. They were really well prepared. They were ready for this game. But man, just the responses, not only from the team and the coaching staff, but the fan base. I know you all know what post I'm talking about from a fan page of James Madison, where it's like, are we serious now? Are we really doing this? Okay, whatever. But goes to my point. Louisville didn't play well. James Madison came out and went all in. Feast or famine. They tried things they hadn't done before. They pulled out a bunch of trick plays, a lot of misdirection, and they lost by 14 points. Louisville still beat them by pretty much the spread. If you took the spread at 13.5, the Cardinals covered. So I get that the Cardinals didn't play great, but this notion that teams can't improve is wild to me. So no, I think it's too early in the season to temper expectations. Am I feeling particularly great about the performance against James Madison? No. Do I understand that things have to improve, or it could be a tough go for the rest of the year? Of course I do. And will there be a time in the next couple of weeks where we revisit this conversation? Possibly. But after week 2, I can't sit here and say that we are ready to have that conversation yet. If you get into ACC play and the team is still struggling, by all means, let's have the conversation. But there are teams across the country that are struggling with teams that they're supposed to beat. I mean, look at Clemson. Look at some other teams. I think that the transfer portal era, you're going to see that more and more. And I know that might not necessarily have happened to this extent, but even then, 2023, the first 3 wins were, pretty close victories. Louisville didn't look good against Georgia Tech for the first half. They didn't look good against Indiana for the second half. They handled business against James Madison like they handled those 2 teams. 2024, kind of hard to tell because you played 2 teams that you were definitely supposed to decimate, but Georgia Tech didn't look good. Notre Dame didn't look good. Better competition, but still, point still stands. So I think that it is just going to take some time for this team to gel. I think that there needs to be, basically a collective looking in the mirror and just kind of figuring some things out, truthfully. But another thing is that unless Louisville lost one of these first couple games, you weren't going to know if they were going to meet expectations. Like if you go 3-0 against EKU, James Madison, and Bowling Green, chances are you already had Louisville projected to win those games anyway. So you're really not going to know much about your expectations until you get to late September when you go to Pittsburgh. That's when you start to have that conversation. So I think it's just too early right now. Will we need to revisit this conversation in a couple weeks? I really hope not, but it's possible. We'll see. I still have confidence until the team shows me not to consistently. So when we come back, we're going to discuss what Louisville needs to do to be successful for the entirety of this season. We'll discuss when we come back on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. It delivers confidence with every ride with more IIHS Top Safety Pick awards than anyone else. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. And with the all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season, just like I do. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Also, while I have you, let's tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here. Week 1 is in the books. FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. One reason why I like FanDuel so much is because it makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. And it's quick, easy, and the best way to add a little bit more energy, because for me, I like to sweat out those late money line parlays, the same game player prop parlays. Like, there's so much that goes on. The versatility is something that I cherish as well. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. With it being the bye week, we are going to discuss a little basketball recruiting tomorrow, because there's not a football game this weekend. We'll start to discuss Bowling Green next week when game week officially arrives. We're going to talk a little bit about basketball recruiting tomorrow. A couple players you know about, one you maybe not heard about too much, but more to discuss on tomorrow's episode of the show. But we are finalizing the mailbag episode. One more question. That is, if you had to identify 3 things that Louisville needs to do for the rest of the season to ensure that they are successful, what would those 3 things be? And this one was as open-ended of a question as perhaps I've had on the Locked On Louisville podcast. Like, it took me a while because I'm like, well, they need to do this. Well, of course they need to do that. I mean, if we're being like literal, they've got to score more than their opponents. I mean, no, but I think the first thing is what you see through the first couple of weeks. The first thing is winning in the trenches, winning at the line of scrimmage. Because if you don't, especially offensively, that's kind of where we're leading with this first one. If you don't give your running backs those lanes to run through, you're not going to have an effective run game. And thus, you're going to make your offense one-dimensional. Thus, you're going to have an air raid offense, and you're playing behind the sticks, and that's just not going to be a recipe for success. Not having that balance is going to be disastrous for the Cardinals. And then not to mention protecting Miller Moss. And Miller Moss has to take a snap and immediately scramble out of the pocket because there are free blitzers coming through. It's going to be a problem. Now, is every team going to run a zero blitz against Louisville? Probably not. But you best believe teams watched that James Madison game and said, if you pull some different stunts, if you disguise your blitzes, and if you get to the backfield, you are going to make Louisville's life miserable. So the first thing is winning in the trenches on the offensive side of the football. creating those gaps for the running game, setting the tone, winning at the line of scrimmage, being that enforcer like you were the past 2 years. And then, of course, protecting Miller Moss. The second one might sound a little bit cliche. You could kind of make it 1A, 1B. I don't care. The second one is the pass rush. Something that will help the Cardinals secondary when you play teams that can throw the ball more effectively than the first two opponents you played is not giving quarterbacks every bit of time they need to go through their progressions, make their reads, and throw to their guys, because guys in the secondary can't defend forever. And I feel like that was sort of an issue that we didn't talk about as much. Like, yeah, secondary was bad last year for Louisville. What was one of the main causes of that? Cardinals' defensive line didn't really serve as the enforcer. They weren't getting into the opposing backfield. They were getting in the backfield, but they weren't converting those to sacks. The pass rush wasn't effective, especially early on. So if guys like Clev Lubin, A.J. Green, Wesley Bailey, and on the interior, Rene Conga, Jordan Girard, like if that nucleus of guys on your defensive front can still effectively rush the passer, then I think that this Cardinals defense is going to reap the benefits of that. It's going to benefit every level of the defense, the secondary, but also the linebacker core that is now without their most talented player and perhaps the most talented player on the Cardinals defense. So it all starts up front. If you dominate the line of scrimmage, if you are stout in defending the run, and especially getting after the passer and forcing quarterbacks to be uncomfortable, either sacking quarterbacks, forcing, ill-advised throws, creating turnovers because of the pressure, that's what you're looking for. And the third thing is kind of like a combination of the little things. It's the things that might not necessarily be like a specific on the field thing. So I've got 4 things that combine into this category. I think preparation for the opponent last year, especially on the defensive side, whether you're playing SMU or at some points maybe Miami, the preparation just wasn't there. And you saw this week, the offensive preparation for James Madison wasn't great. So being prepared for your opponent like you were in 2023, limiting the turnovers. Cardinals had 3 turnovers week 1, albeit at least one was a fluke, but they are still turnovers. Week 2, there was that sack forced fumble on Miller Moss. Winning the turnover battle is key. Limiting the turnovers, not beating yourself is important. Limit the penalties. Did a great job at improving between week 1 and week 2. Still, the defensive holding was so unnecessary that would have given you the ball in the first quarter. The first drive of the second half, the Tayon Holloway holding or pass interference, whichever one they called. If you just play that straight up, I know it was an underthrown ball, but if you play that straight up, they're getting off the field one way or another, whether it's a turnover or punting the ball. And also field position. This is where the Cardinals have struggled. They've given the ball to EKU near midfield. Now, thankfully, the Cardinals defense didn't allow anything, but James Madison started their first 2 drives close to midfield. One, I believe, was in Louisville territory. So these small things combined, but if you remember not too long ago, this was our greatest criticism about the Scott Satterfield era, is that Louisville dominated games. They outgained their opponent frequently, often, by a good margin most times. And they kept losing these close games because they weren't executing on the little things. The preparation, limiting turnovers, limiting penalties, field position. You could even say limiting the big plays. So it's kind of a blanket term. Maybe it's a cop-out for me, but that's kind of where I'm going with this. But that's going to wrap up this Thursday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here tomorrow. Go Cards.